Good afternoon. I'm Jeffrey Archer, Dean of University Libraries, Museums, and Press, and thank you for being here. When you think about libraries, you might think of online journals, databases, the books in the stacks, but what better place to engage with ideas than with the author themselves? So I'm so happy that we have an opportunity and create a space where we can come together and hear and dialogue with authors and ideas. Before I turn the mic over to our president, I will read our land acknowledgement. And I ask for you not only to listen to the beginning where we acknowledge history, but also frame where we want to work. We respectfully acknowledge that Baylor University in Waco and its original campus in Independence are on the land and territories originally occupied by indigenous peoples, including the Waco and Tawakoni of the Wichita and affiliated tribes, the Tonkawa, the Numanu Comanche, Karankawa, and Lipan Apache. These indigenous peoples were dispossessed of and removed from their lands over centuries by European colonization and American expansionism. In recognition that these native nations are the original stewards of Baylor campus locations, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Turn this over to President Livingstone.
Thank you, Dean Archer. And I do want to acknowledge Dean Archer. He's an amazingly innovative and creative leader of our libraries, and it's why you see so many wonderful things going on here that are far beyond what most of us ever believed a library could ever do, and it's been wonderful additions to the academic life of our campus. Well, I want to welcome you to the second of our Readers Meet the Author events for this academic year. We are really blessed to be at a university where every year we have so many outstanding faculty members that are publishing books about really important and fascinating ideas that are having a wide impact, certainly from different academic disciplines, but around a great diversity of topics as well. And it's a challenge every year for the provost office to pick the 5 or 6 books that we get to highlight here. It's an opportunity to celebrate these faculty members and to hear about the really interesting work that they're doing. I do want to thank Provost Brickhouse and her office for the support of this events, for the libraries, and Dean Archer for hosting these events on an ongoing basis. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Luke Winslow, who's going to discuss his most recent book, Oligarchy in America, Power, Justice, and the Rule of Few. The book surveys political and economic ideas in America that have led to, quote, an increasingly entrenched, ultra-rich class of oligarchs. So it'll be interesting to hear more about that. He reveals the intellectual roots of oligarchy in the United States and provides readers the tools to recognize oligarchy around them. He won the Roderick P. Hart Outstanding Book Award for the National Communications Association's Political Communications Division for this book, so it is an award-winning book. He was also one of our 2 nominees from Baylor for the Andrew Carnegie Fellows Program last year. So we're really excited to hear from you and to hear about the work that you're doing. I love also that Dr. Winslow's courses reinforce our campus-wide emphasis on civil discourse and bridging partisan divides in the really divisive times we live in now. And I think some of your students are with us today. So that says a lot that they would take their lunch hour to come and hear you. So that's wonderful. Dr. Winslow serves as Associate Professor of Communication, Director of the Communication International Politics Study Abroad program. My husband, Brad, and I had the privilege to spend a couple of days with that program in Florence 2 summers ago. And it was obvious from the interaction Dr. Winslow had with his students, how much they love him, what a wonderful relationship he has. And so not only is he an exceptional scholar, he is also an exceptional teacher and engages well with our students. His doctorate is from the University of Texas at Austin. He did undergraduate work at Azusa Pacific, and he did a master's degree at Cal State Fullerton. He then taught at University of Texas, Austin, St. Edwards in Austin, and San Diego State. He's been at Baylor since 2020 with research that focuses on rhetorical studies, political communication, and religious rhetoric. He's also published a lot of articles in addition to the books that he's written, and he coaches basketball in Midway Youth Basketball League when he's not teaching. How's your team do? You haven't started probably yet this year. Oh, good. Are you going to draft your own child in the draft? Okay, okay. Good dad. That's a smart thing to do. Our moderator for today's session is Bill Whitaker. Many of you know Mr. Whitaker. He's been a Texas journalist for many years. He has been described by one of his editors as an equal opportunity skeptic. Yes. We'll see how that goes in the conversation today, Luke. Be prepared. He retired as senior editor of the Waco Tribune-Herald in November of 2020 after a 45-year career in journalism. He continues to write columns for the Waco Trib as well as other outlets, and he, in 2016, edited a published volume of editorials from the Waco Trib titled The View from Waco 2016. He also writes occasionally on his blog, The Daily Bill. So we're grateful for both of you being with us and sharing your insights and wisdom today. If you have questions you would like to ask, please think about those as the conversation continues. And then if you're online, you can also put questions in the Q&A feature online, and those will be shared with the group. I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Winslow and Mr. Whitaker. We're grateful to have you all with us today. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I begin this session with 3 quotes to better frame Luke's new book, or latest book, I should say. He's got so many books in the pipeline and published, and gets ridiculous. Anyway, these quotes will frame oligarchy in America, power, justice, and the rule of the few. The first quote comes from 66-year-old Amos Singletary, an unschooled Baptist and gristmill operator participating in the Massachusetts Convention meeting in January 1788 to consider whether or not to ratify the U.S. Constitution. Ratification of the Constitution nationwide, historians agree, depended largely on what Massachusetts did. There was a lot of concern about amendments and the ability to amend the Constitution. A lot of skepticism as to whether 9 of the 13 original states would ratify the Constitution. Mr. Singleton's cynical observation addressed to the President of the Constitutional Convention of 1788 in Massachusetts. These lawyers and men of learning and moneyed men that talk so finely and gloss over matters so smoothly to make us poor, illiterate people swallow the pill. They expect to get into Congress themselves. They expect to be the managers of this Constitution and get all the power and all the money into their hands. And then they will swallow us up, us little folks, like the great Leviathan, Mr. President. Yes, just as the whale swallowed up Jonah. My second quote comes from Texas State Representative James Tallarico, a Democrat who is running for the U.S. Senate. And he spoke at University High School about a week and a half ago. And this is a quote that I took from him while I was there. And he was speaking to Democrats, independents, and I assume recovering Republicans. The more I see what's happening in this state and in this country, the more I think the only minority destroying America is the billionaires. Trans people are 1% of the population. Muslims, 1% of the population. Undocumented people, 1% of the population. We're all focused on the wrong 1%. Trans people aren't taking away our health care. Muslims aren't defunding our schools. Immigrants aren't voting for tax cuts, excuse me, for themselves or their rich friends. It's the billionaires and their puppet politicians. And then finally, this quote from the President of the United States, speaking last week at a dinner for wealthy donors who gave millions of dollars so he could build a ballroom, a $250 million ballroom onto the White House, all amidst a government shutdown hinging over whether to cut health care tax credits for needy Americans. An excerpt from his speech. I want to build a ballroom. It needs it badly. And a ballroom that seats 600 or 700 people so that when we have state dinners, then he kind of lapses, or more if it's possible. He's talking about people who can get in there. That's why we celebrate you, because you have given tremendous amounts of money to see a ballroom built for the first time at the White House. The White House, for 150 years plus, they wanted to have a ballroom, and it never happened because they didn't have a real estate person. A few days later, on No King's Day, the president posted a video of himself wearing a crown, flying a fighter jet, and dumping excrement on people in some major city. It's not listed. Those are the three quotes. They don't come from Luke's book because it was published in 2024, so he's missing all this, but they really go to the heart of what he writes about. And this book, I don't know how many of you read it yet or are planning to read it. Maybe students have gotten into it, but this is a very challenging book to read, and this is my editorial part. It's a challenging book to read because, and it's very well written, very articulate, very, very well researched. But it's challenging to read because of the arguments that are made for an oligarchic class. And it will make you wonder where democracy is headed. It will make you wonder about the wisdom of unrestrained capitalism, which we all believe in to a significant degree, but not unrestrained maybe. It raises a lot of questions about who we are as Americans. And it's head spinning in some ways. Some of the arguments that are in there, it's a very absorbing book, and the research is amazing in it with lots of footnotes. You can actually go and read almost and enjoy them in themselves. It's a challenging read in that many of our flaws and failures are on parade in this book. Every time I finish a chapter, Luke, it seems like I'd pick up the paper and I'd read about Elon Musk spending upwards to $270 million to help get the president reelected. Or I'd read about something about Jeff Bezos was going to cut back the type of topics that readers could submit for columns and letters to the editor in the Washington Post editorial page. That's pretty kind of shocking. Or something about Mark Zuckerberg kind of clearing the way for more political chum, I guess I would call it, in the choppy waters of Facebook. So it's a book that's very timely. Even though it was finished in 2024, it is what I would call a terrific preface to what we are witnessing today. Luke, you quote Jerry Seinfeld at one point in the book. It really gets better than that, folks. But you quote Jerry Seinfeld on the definition of oligarchy and the fact most people aren't really sure what oligarchs exactly are. We know they're rich. We know they want to get more money or more power or more influence. A decade ago, if anybody mentioned oligarch, my mind immediately went to Russia. And, I imagined somebody in the sphere of President Putin, who's fantastically wealthy and has his wife in one place and his girlfriend in another, and might, if he disappoints the president, might fall out of a window or something to his death. I'd like to talk a little bit about where you got the idea for this book, how it developed conceptually, and the larger problem that this book sets out to redress, because I think it is a terrific lead up to where we are today.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I think the quotes that you read do a wonderful job of setting up what the problem is, and that's essentially we have really poor vocabulary for describing our political and economic system. In the U.S. we have two major parties, and we like to position them on like this ideological seesaw. And, liberal progressives would be on the political left, and they favor more robust government interventions into the economy. And then on the political right, you have conservatives, libertarians, folks that would prefer a smaller state, fiscal discipline, low taxes, free trade. And we have this seesaw. And we kind of position people, parties, issues on this seesaw. Oligarchs come in and just blow that up. And what kind of inspired the book was reading Jane Mayer's 2015 book, Dark Money, in which she profiles the Koch family. And Koch Industries, Charles and David Koch, really wealthy industrialists out of Wichita, Kansas. And they are often talked about in public conversations as if they're on the political right, conservatives, neoliberals, libertarians, something like that. But then you read Mayer's description of their actual actions and their interventions into the economy, and they're totally incongruous with the conceptual definition of what we think the political right is. And their actions, in many ways, are intuitive, and they're totally understandable. Like, imagine in your life, if you had unlimited resources, unlimited wealth and power, and then you had this immensely powerful nation state that had the unique power to tax and regulate, had a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence and coercion. Wouldn't you, with all of your resources, enlist the nation state to enhance your wealth and protect it? And the answer would be yes, and that's exactly what they do. And so the problem that the book starts with is this: we have this political ideological spectrum that is just totally misaligned with how things actually work. And in some ways, again, it's kind of like uninteresting to think that, like, you know, rich, powerful people are using their resources to maintain their wealth. Like, yeah, that's pretty normal. The part that fascinates me about it, and again, your quotes do a good job of kind of setting this up, is why we all put up with it. So in a representative democracy, you would think we would have the potential to check those kind of enlistments of our nation state to enhance and protect a small group of billionaires' wealth. And so that's why the democratic part, the democratic oligarchy part, is really fascinating. And that's where, so my background is in rhetoric. I'm an associate professor of rhetorical studies, and so rhetoric is essentially about the study of public argument. So the hope of the book is, you know, you have this problem, and then you have an analysis of the public conversations, of the public argument that gather consent, that kind of allow us in a representative democracy to put up with something that's not really in all of our interests.
Mm. Let's talk a little bit about rhetoric, because I think a lot of us think of rhetoric in kind of a negative way. We think of the president going off topic, or we think of Beto O'Rourke possibly assaulting his extemporaneous speaking with profanity. I actually hear a lot of people complain about that. They love Beto, but they hate his profanity. They like Trump, but they wish he wouldn't go off topic sometimes. But that's not the kind of rhetoric you're really talking about. You're talking about something that I believe it goes back to the ancients.
Yeah.
You're talking about people like Socrates and I think Aristotle or something. What, Ted, we don't explain that?
Yeah. So rhetoric often in public conversations is trickery,
Right.
You know, something that's fake or something that's not real. As an academic discipline, right, goes back to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, who were interested in public argument, and more specifically, rhetoric in democracies. So if we're going to have one of the first experiments with democracy, how do we as a people make laws? How do we kind of govern ourselves that's not just top down? And so as an ancient discipline, we think about it today. You know, President Livingstone mentioned the classes that we teach on political rhetoric are in many ways about learning how to analyze public argument, learning how to analyze public conversations so that you can then kind of have some access to who has power and who doesn't. So, right, a lot of times, you know, you have to defend rhetoric as something that, it's not trickery, it's not subterfuge, it's actually something that's quite valuable. Just one example. So when Charlie Kirk was killed on a Wednesday, I had my politics and communication class on a Thursday, so the next day. And I had this whole lecture planned on political humor. And we were going to watch Will Ferrell's impersonation of George W. Bush, and we were going to kind of laugh about it, and that was going to be great. And then Charlie Kirk was killed, and so shelved that. And instead, the next class, for 75 minutes, we just talked about what happened. And we made sense of it. We used words and we tried to talk as a class about the Charlie Kirk killing. And one thing that really struck me about it, and my students, many of them here today, had their primary reference point was social media. And so they learned about the assassination. Many of them actually saw it, whether they wanted to or not, on social media. So social media was the primary sense-making mechanism for many of my students. And many of them talked about how just pernicious and harmful that was. That you have these social media platforms that are helping you make sense of this tragic event. And one of my students kind of made the point, idealistically and admittedly and kind of naively saying, I wish we had a place where we could talk about these kind of things that was, you know, relatively bipartisan, that was safe, that was full of like well-intended, good-meaning people. And I kind of pointed out the irony. We were in a classroom at Baylor University kind of doing what my student was pining for. And so rhetoric in many ways is about that. It's about like, let's come together, or let's make sense of something. Now, of course, not everyone has access to Baylor University classrooms. We have an admissions department, and we have tuition and all that. And so the hope would be with something like rhetoric, not just as trickery or subterfuge, but as a tool that we can all use to kind of make sense of challenging social, political topics.
Well, you mentioned Charles Koch, for instance. I want to look at rhetoric for a little bit, and then we'll get back to the oligarchs themselves and oligarchy and democracy and justice and the rule of the few. How did you apply your standards of rhetoric to Charles Koch, who's the surviving brother of the Koch brothers? And he writes books regularly, and they're very interesting books. I don't agree with them, but they're very interesting treatises. How do you, or Tucker Carlson? You got a chapter in there on Tucker Carlson. We'll go into that in a little bit. I'm not sure where he fits in all this, but we're gonna debate that. Yeah. How do you apply, and how would your students apply standards of rhetoric to people like Charles Koch and Tucker Carlson, who, whatever else, are very major communicative figures of our times?
Yeah. So the book includes 9 case studies. So examples in many ways are kind of they're the engines of our understanding, the engines of judgment. So first couple chapters define terms, kind of put oligarchy in its context. And then once you kind of get through that, then you can actually get to the examples in the case study chapters.
And I noticed that the chapters are devoted not to necessarily to oligarchs themselves, although Koch is an exception, and Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie is an exception. Most of them are people who are scholars themselves or journalists, like James Kilpatrick. Those of us long in the tooth will remember him. They're people who deal in making arguments, compelling arguments, either in newspaper pieces or books or on lecterns or on social media. But go ahead.
So the case studies are essentially analysis of public argument. So you take these significant figures that have some influence on public policy and public argument, and also try to put a fresh take on what their arguments are. And so to kind of apply the training of rhetorical studies in this specific case is to, as our kind of premise laid out, if we have these public policies that are misaligned with the interests of ordinary people, well, then why do ordinary people put up with these public policies? And so in many ways, it's kind of a gathering of a consent that we're going to catalog the arguments that encourage so many ordinary people who don't have the same interests as Charles Koch and Tucker Carlson to consent to their worldview and to consent to their arguments.
Well, and I want to get into why do the people, well, let's go ahead and get into that. We'll get into rhetoric in a little bit. Why do the people put up with stuff? I mean, the polls show that people get outraged over certain things that are going on right now. But Elon Musk, who kind of comes in, your book leads up to Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. That guy is incredibly popular. Mm-hmm. He is very, very popular. I used to follow the public commenting anytime we had a story on Elon Musk in the newspaper. I would look to see what the comments were. And people in 2017 and in 2015 and 2019, they would complain about him because they would say his SpaceX rocket testing facility was cracking their foundation, or it was rattling their windows, or it knocked Aunt Mary's picture off the wall, or cracked the wall. Elon Musk got no love. And then he became part of the Make America Great Again universe. And he became a major supporter of Trump. And I noticed the public commenting changed. And people said, but he's all American, and he's taken us to Mars, and he's the first brother of Donald Trump. And all of a sudden, people didn't complain as much about his rattling walls and cracking the foundation. Or is Elon just he's an intriguing guy, but is he just an exception to the rule when it comes to oligarchs? Is he maybe not a fair example? I mean, Charles Koch doesn't get any love.
Yeah.
But James Kilpatrick didn't get that kind of love, and but anyway, that's the question.
Yeah, Musk is a good example of kind of one of the central themes of the book. Put simply, rich people are better than us. And if they're rich, they must deserve it. And they earned it. And with Musk, simply put, I mean, he's an engineering genius, right?
Right.
He has all kinds of entrepreneurial horsepower. He works his butt off. I mean,
he's exciting. He's an exciting
my
figure.
goodness. Yeah. And so that leads him to have all kinds of like engineering breakthroughs with electric cars and rockets and things like that. Fine. The interesting part is how in our minds we equate that he's better than us in these technical areas, engineering, to this just transcendent superiority. And that's where Musk isn't unique. That's Andrew Carnegie, that's Charles Koch, that's Herbert Spencer. That's this whole idea that survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, that we have these hierarchies of power that are justified. Some of it's divine, some of it's God blesses people that are good, not just in the afterlife, but on earth. And so you can use your wealth as evidence of your faith. Some of it's like pseudo-Darwinian. Again, only the strong survival, survival of the fittest, that you can see how good I am by checking out my bank account. And again, that's kind of fine and normal as long as the silos are clear. Like Elon Musk should be designing electric cars. Should he be influencing like the FAA and the Veterans Affairs Administration? Those are two very different things. But again, consent in a representative democracy is we allow it. And so we kind of have this like, transcendent superiority from one area to the other.
But so why do people put up with that though? I mean, obviously there's been a lot of damage done. There's concern about privacy, security issues that have happened. And ironically, he's gotten upset with President Trump over the spending going on by the Republican Congress.
Yeah.
Why he continues to be insanely popular though? Is it just that we Americans want to have people to look up to, and that subconsciously or not we endow them with liberties that perhaps we wouldn't even allow our neighbor? Is that it?
I think it shows the potency of that public argument. And again, I think it's partly religious. I think it's partly Darwinian. I think it's partly social. And it's this idea that ordinary people should consent to the influence of the rich and the powerful. Not abnormal, right? In a representative democracy, we have concentrations of power. The question
I think about, and I'm a big fan of Elon's Mars program and all that kind of thing. I don't want to go to Mars, but some of my readers wanted to send me to Mars. But I mean, I think one thing that I just surprised that didn't outrage more people was when he got up there and began handing out $1 million checks to people who came to his rallies in support of Donald Trump. I mean, I don't remember anything like that. I mean, we've had bribery and we've had vote buying before in American history, that's for sure, but not out in the open with million-dollar checks presented on stage to everyday ordinary Americans. To me, as an American, I would think that almost everybody here, whatever your political stripes, would be outraged by that kind of action. And yet he got away with it. Is it because he has that pseudo-religious or divine sort of genius sort of status that we lack?
Yeah, the question, why did he get away with it is an interesting one, because we do have counter-majoritarian institutions like the courts that would look closely at handing out million-dollar checks and the legality of that. And so, we have a durable American democracy because we have counter-majoritarian institutions that have kind of protect us with that kind of influence. But the larger question is like, why doesn't that cause more scandal? Why isn't there more outrage when something like that happens? And I think a big part of it has to do with develop in the book this concept of consequentialism. President Trump is known for saying, I'm the president and you're not. He's questioned about some of his policies. Leslie Stahl asked him about some of his policies. So I'm the president and you're not. And it's a very compelling argument because it says, when you question my competency, look back at my track record. Look at the evidence. Just this weekend, President Trump was thinking about sending Zelensky in Ukraine Tomahawk missiles. And he got a call from Putin, and he changed his mind. And a reporter asked him about it. A reporter asked him if he's being played by Putin. And Trump said, no, a lot of people try to play me. And look how that's gone so far. And that's a consequentialist argument. It's, I can't be played. Look at my wealth and look at my power. And that's very compelling. You know what I mean? That's like, there's some kind of intuitive evidence for that especially in an information-deprived environment, can have a lot of effect on people.
Well, there's a statement that's been made that all oligarchs are billionaires, but not all billionaires are oligarchs.
Yeah.
And I want to see if you'll help me define. And the book gives me some pretty good guidelines, but who would suffice as an oligarch today? Is Donald Trump? I mean, you also mentioned somewhere in your book that. And I'm not saying President Trump is a dictator, and he denies vehemently that he's a dictator or a king. He likes to play with the notion sometimes, but he denies he is a king, and he denies that he is a dictator. So just to make that clear. You also mention in the book someplace that dictators or authoritarians are not in themselves oligarchs. Oligarchs are this class of wealthy, well-connected people who work often behind the scenes to help or give themselves advantages in business, often not against people, but against their competitors in the same businesses sometimes, to start upstarts and things like that. Is that fair? So then is Donald Trump is he an oligarch today? Is he an oligarch? Or was he before he was president?
Yeah, I'll give you the professor answer.
And I've got some others here I'm going to ask about real quick.
It depends. It's a spectrum.
There you go. That's
right? It's not a dichotomy, it's a spectrum. Trump complicates the kind of orthodox definition of oligarchy because, as you're describing, Bill, conventionally it's the marriage of wealth and power. So you have a lot of money, and you use that money to acquire political power. And then once you acquire that political power, you use it to get more money. So like a snowball going down a hill, gathers momentum. Generally, as you're describing, oligarchs like Charles Koch like to work behind the scenes.
Right.
So one of the conceptual definitions was oligarchs don't run for office. So is Vladimir Putin an oligarch? I mean, well, kind of. I mean, he's definitely a nominal political leader. He's also using his wealth to acquire more political power and using his political power to acquire more wealth. Trump complicates it. Because again, we don't necessarily elect oligarchs for nominal positions of political power. But then, is he using the office of the presidency to enrich himself? Probably. Is he using his wealth to acquire political power? Absolutely.
So you'd
That's
say
well
he's probably a
documented.
unique oligarch.
I think about
A
him as an
specialized
extension.
category.
Yeah.
I
And again,
see.
another professor term. He problematizes the conceptual definition of oligarch because he's in a nominal position of power.
Okay, well, let me ask about one of the boogeymen on the left, George Soros. Is George Soros an oligarch?
Here's where understanding the ideological seesaw and then like rejecting that is helpful. So if we think about Trump on the political right, you're right, and Soros on the political left, but that's not how it works. That's not helpful. Soros might be a liberal, progressive, like political activist that uses his immense resources to promote liberal, progressive positions. But does he use that to acquire political power for himself? Now, again, some people would say absolutely. I would be suspicious of that. I'd like to see more direct evidence of that, especially compared to the oligarchs that are featured in the book.
Right, so he doesn't easily fit into that category
Right.
then. Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, for folks who are out of state and don't know, Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks are two West Texas billionaires who have largely, as a journalist, in my opinion, they have both largely bought off much of the Texas legislature to ensure the passage of controversial school vouchers, which finally got passed this year in the legislature. But I don't know whether they're actually oligarchs or they support candidates who are going to support their causes. So
Yeah,
I would think that makes it.
Yeah, they're probably a more like enriching example than Trump, or at least one that fits, examples that fit with the conventional definition. So you have Dunn and Wilkes that not a lot of people have heard of, besides political journalists in Texas, but they are exerting tremendous influence, tremendous political influence on Texas politics. Not because they are, inspiring speakers, but because they have a lot of money. And so your example of school vouchers, I think that's maybe one to look at, but I would also, if you want to kind of flesh it out, let's look at how their political preferences are enriching themselves. And let's look at the influence that they're having, like on the Ag Commission, and the influence that their wealth is having on public policies in the state of Texas that are actually enriching themselves and their family.
Well, they have several issues that are important to them, and religion in schools, school vouchers. I mean, so you would say they're probably fitted classification of that. How about Taylor Swift? I'm not going to do this for the rest of the hour. I just want to. I'm just curious because I'm trying to give you examples both from the left and the right who.
Has a lot of economic power, doesn't have as much political power, and therefore kind of not necessarily oligarch.
Okay. When you get students to come to your class, rhetoric helps. I think it's very useful for a lawyer. It's very useful for a political scientist. It's very useful for journalists. What use is rhetoric? And you teach several different courses in it. How can rhetoric help the everyday, ordinary Baylor student, who goes to the class and wonders, maybe several days into your class, what is rhetoric going to do for me in my daily life if I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a political scientist and I'm not going to be a journalist?
Yeah, rhetoric is a tool to help you think critically, to weigh arguments, to speak and write eloquently, to consider evidence. And so to that point, it's like an invaluable tool that a lot of our students desperately need. You know, David Brooks was here last spring and he talked about Baylor having the riches that the world desperately needs. And I think about rhetoric kind of along those terms, that our world needs people that can think critically, that can weigh evidence, that can make and defend arguments. Our world needs people that can engage in productive public conversations, especially with people they disagree with. You know this as a newspaper reporter. We're living in an era of like fractured truth or fragmented truth. Your own truth is on that supercomputer that you hold in your pocket. And so without, you know, traditional institutions or a decline of traditional institutions with like a fragmented truth,
Really?
each person has their own like responsibility to think critically and to weigh different arguments. And rhetoric is, like you said, an ancient discipline, but incredibly urgent, incredibly timely today for helping our students do that.
You know, I was talking to some of my friends that are in this room here. We have a group that meets every month, and we manage to debate issues to ad nauseum. And some of them had read in the Waco Tribune-Herald that you and I were going to be talking about this. And they asked me a little bit more about it. And I said, well, what Luke's done is he's and I've got a hardback version of this, by the way. It's all marked up. I said what he's done is he's taken prominent individuals who have been, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say are advocates or apologists for concepts that encourage what results as oligarchy. And I named off some of the people that are in it, you know, James Kilpatrick and Herbert Spencer and Andrew Carnegie and Louis Powell and Tucker Carlson. And they said, whoa, wait a minute. I can't remember who said this in the group, but one of them said, I understand the inclusion of everybody in that group except for Tucker Carlson. Mm-hmm. And even in and he's a figure of our time, so I think he's probably resonates a little bit more than, say, James Kilpatrick does anymore. And yet in the book you point out what a chameleon he is. Yeah. I mean, at one point he's to his credit, is urging conservative writers to be more factual, more grounded in what they do. And then a little while later, he's lost himself into flying saucers and I mean, I'm serious. He's gotten into a period where he's, you know, spreading conspiracy theories that are not worthy of someone that is encouraging conservatives to be better and more factually grounded. Why on earth, Luke, did you stick Tucker Carlson in there?
Yeah,
that's the question.
Carlson promotes political cynicism. He promotes this idea that it's all corrupt, and if it's all corrupt, check out, disengage. And when that happens, that's when you have the Dunns and the Wilkes and the Kochs and the people that are kind of willing to deploy the immense resources of the nation state to go to work. So a healthy representative democracy needs people to be attentive and engaged. And Tucker Carlson encourages you, because it's all corrupt, to not worry about it, to check out. And he's a fascinating case study. He began in the 90s and early 2000s as this kind of fresh kind of libertarian thinker. And he was willing to kind of buck the orthodoxy of the political right in the pursuit of truth. I'm
going to try to get in a couple more questions, and then I know that we've got to get some questions here to the audience because they probably almost have some better questions perhaps. In the conclusion of your book, first of all, has the last 10 months exceeded anything you imagined when you were weighing all these arguments, or does it fit it to a T? Or, I mean, I know you and I have talked occasionally over the last few months, and we're both astonished at some of the things we're seeing, but does it just perfectly fit what this book serves as a preface for,
I don't know.
Or has it far exceeded it?
I'm uncomfortable because I'm not a journalist, you know, and I need like 5 years to think about that question, you know, and then I'll come back to it.
Well, you're not going to get it today.
I know.
Well, let me.
Go ahead.
The other thing, well, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there are affirmations of some of the trends that are in the book, but there are also some extensions and some divergences that I'm surprised by.
Okay. You mentioned solutions. Every good writer, when he or she is highlighting problems, needs to come up with a few solutions or hopeful notes. Your solutions include breaking up the banks, tech monopolies, airlines, financial services and telecommunications companies, and pharmaceutical industries. Anti-oligarch interventions could also pursue new antitrust policies, empower more workers to bargain collectively, raise minimum wage, expand health care, restrict licensing, modify corporate governance structure. The concentration of political power among oligarchs should be broken up, reducing the ultra-rich donations of political campaigns, Citizens United versus FEC.
Yeah, how naive does all that sound?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I thought, what planet? You might as well be on Mars.
I know, what planet is that from?
Do you really believe that I don't see us ever going into that direction, short of a revolution or a civil war or something like that?
And you know, that's part of the setup there, and that's actually the foil to say that in a representative democracy, if you don't have the consent of ordinary people, none of that stuff's going to happen. That stuff is just a fantasy. And so to read that, to read the newspaper is like, what? And so the redress, the solution is, first of all, counter-majoritarian institutions like the courts have to step up. Second, we need a social movement. None of that stuff's going to happen if you don't have ordinary people that are willing to say, we're not going to put up with this anymore. So all that is yeah, that's great, but it's not going to happen unless you have a social movement.
Unless people vote. Okay, I'm sorry, my apologies. I know it's time for questions, and there's the magic box. Whoever speaks gets to hold the box, and the question will get answered. If you rub it and speak into it, it will get answered. I want questions, please. I know we all do, from all different perspectives. Whatever your political stripes, if you heard something that angered you or outraged you or impressed you, this is the time to take a shot at it, and you've got the man.
Bill mentioned Taylor Swift. My question is a little more generic. Are there any in the United States non-white males that would fall into the category of being oligarchs today?
Yeah, really good question. If you take something like consequentialism and say the proof of my superiority is in my material outcomes, you cannot disentangle that idea from the kind of systems of empowerment that promote the interests of white men. So historically, that has been a strong argument to rationalize like real stratified hierarchies of power. Those have gone out of fashion, at least kind of in most areas, that you can't directly appeal to white supremacy or patriarchy as a way to justify a flash frozen hierarchy of power. But I think that's what makes the continued durability of oligarchy that much more interesting, because they're not direct appeals to racial or gendered superiority. They're something else. And so, for example, if you do find a oligarch that fits the definition of oligarch that defies whiteness or maleness, it would be really interesting then to look at the public arguments that they would use to rationalize their, or to justify their wealth and power.
You've got something in the book here on Andrew Carnegie and the Gilded Age, so named by Mark Twain, as we all know. How do the corrupt politicians and the greedy industrialists of the Gilded Age in the 1880s and 1890s and into the early 1900s, how do they compare to today's oligarchs?
Yeah, the similarity is that
in terms of our today's corrupt politicians and today's greedy industrialists.
Take the richest people in the world in Silicon Valley, So the consistent thread is that we're all better off. In the Gilded Age, we had railroads.
Right.
Now we got TikTok. And aren't we all better off, right? And so it's the same rationale that if you allow me to acquire power, I will make your life better.
Any other questions?
Up here and then in the back.
So people have been studying like the concentration of wealth and
Hold that box up to just up to your mouth there and speak into it, and your question will be answered. Thank you.
People have been studying the concentration of wealth and its use to like accrue political power in America for like decades and decades. What separates your approach, the cases you study or how you study them, apart from that body of research?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Eric. Some of it has to do with, as we talked about, the unique disciplinary focus that I bring. So whenever you're studying something like wealth and power, you're going to have a lot of people interested in it. And in an academy, you have political scientists and historians, sociologists, all kinds of different academic interests all kinds of academic disciplines are interested in some of the same research questions that we talked about today. The freshness that I hope came out in our discussion today is the analysis of public arguments, and specifically the analysis of public argument that shed light on our willingness to consent to a system of governance that's not in our interests.
Thank you.
My question's a lot like that. We tend to talk about oligarchy like it's bad and evil because it feels bad and evil, right? Like we have in our core, like democracy, we are equals. We all have fair opportunity. And so if somebody who's rich is making a lot more of the decisions than the people are, it seems frustrating and evil and something to be challenged. But we talk in our class about when everything is mediated, when everything is out in the open, when everybody has the similar access to the information that happens behind closed doors, there's actually a lot of chaos that happens in the political system. Is there anything to be said about the necessity for oligarchs in America so that decisions and negotiations can be made?
Yeah, it's a good question, Elijah. There's something to be said for the concentration of power into the hands of the few. 330 million people, we can't live in a direct democracy. We have to have elected representatives that represent our interests. Like, by definition, we can't have a peer democracy. The problem with oligarchy is I think that it's using a flawed metric or a flawed criteria by which we select those people. So we can have concentrations of power. We need that. I want to elect representatives that are industrious and smart and moral and are willing to align their interests with my own. The problem with oligarchy is the misaligned interests. That if your primary goal is to acquire more wealth and you're a political representative, that goal conflicts with my interests. And so the problem is, if you want a healthy democracy, you have to have the alignment of interests. Ordinary people are aligned with the interests of their elected representatives. So I like the idea that power concentrations aren't necessarily inherently evil, I would argue. What we have to be concerned with is the metric by which we use to justify power concentrations.
One question I have, and then I'll turn it over to you guys, I promise. What is the greatest revelation that you personally came across in all this research? I mean, I could tell from, you've just done a ton of research for this book. And even the index notes are fascinating to read. I don't usually say that. What for you? I mean, anytime I write a really deep newspaper story, I learn something. I come to a revelation. What revelation did you, one revelation more than any other that came out that perhaps you weren't aware of when you started this book?
What's lingering with me is the phony use of Darwinian arguments to justify
survival of the fittest.
Yeah,
Herbert Spencer.
Exactly, which isn't Darwinian. Survival of the
Yes.
fittest is a guy named Herbert Spencer that came after. Orthodox Darwinianism, natural selection by evolution, contradicts survival of the fittest.
Right.
Like, there are random mutations in Darwinian biology. Survival of the fittest says it's not random. Survival of the fittest says you deserve what you get. And so this kind of perversion of this biological argument into social Darwinism, it's relevant for the Gilded Age, but it's relevant for now.
And that's why you see many people saying we need to get people off of safety net programs because they need to suffer a little bit and feel the pain and torment of not working or not making money.
Yeah.
So,
And so think about how that might apply if you're interested in the least of these, if you're interested in the widows and the orphans. You have a nation state that has tremendous capacity to aid the least of these. What oligarchy does, especially with this kind of pseudo-Darwinian argument, is it turns the interests of the nation state against the disempowered and to the empowered. So you have these immense resources, and they're not going to care for the people that actually need them the most. They're going to care for the people that are already empowered.
there's a great story about the Good Samaritan in here. Okay, I'm going to shut up. I apologize. Great story about that in here, too.
So I have one final question, and that is the techno bros. That's my daughter's language, but how do they, they're not featured in your book, how do they participate in oligarchy in America? And what potential do they have to change the way in which it functions?
Yeah, they should be featured in the book. And if I were to write another chapter, it would be on the tech bros. It would be Musk, it would be Peter Thiel, it'd be Zuckerberg. Think about the relationship between the Darwinian, pseudo-Darwinian argument and move fast and break things. It's this idea that I have this entrepreneurial power, I have this brilliance that no one else has. I don't want to be encumbered by democracy, because that includes dumb people, and I'm better than them. So if I can eschew, kind of break the bounds of democratic governance, just let me kind of run things on my own, everything will be better off. And so I wish it was, you know, if I could write another chapter, it'd be a nice, like, kind of synthetic closing to this thing that goes back a long ways, that's exerting a ton of influence now on public policy.
Maybe that's edition 2.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful. Thank you, both Luke and Jen. So we do have books for purchase. They're back in the back for signing, and we of course have refreshments. And I would like to invite you to the next Reader Meet the Author, which will be Tuesday, February 17th. This will feature Beth Allison Barr's new book, Becoming the Pastor's Wife, How Marriage Replaced Ordination as a Woman's Path to Ministry. And she will be interviewed by the Dean of Truett Seminary, Todd Still. So I invite you to return. Thank you so much for coming today, and thanks again to
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.